Hello.
Hello, everyone. We're just going to let folks get in the room. We've got a lot of people coming on, getting in the room to attend. So we're just going to give it another minute or so, and then we're going to begin. Hope everybody's doing well. And it's nice to see the faces that I'm seeing on the screen, and it's nice to see all the folks coming in. Okay, so hello everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on gender-based violence. Let me thank everyone for joining. Let me thank the panelists for taking their time and all the staff and interpreters from the outset who will be assisting us. I want to begin today by acknowledging that I'm moderating from Turtle Island, otherwise known as Canada, and honor the land which is and has always been home to many Indigenous and First Nation communities, including Inuit and Métis. I know that there are a lot of you that are really interested in this topic, and we will be making time for questions in between each of the segments. So let's get started, because I'd like everyone who has questions to be able to get their questions answered, and for everyone to hear all the panelists. So a year ago today, we were just beginning our second year of negotiations on Convention 190, a convention that deals with violence and harassment in the world of work. While it was a successful exercise in developing an instrument, it took a lot of work, a lot of consultation, and a hell of a lot of social dialogue. Today, we're feeling the effects of COVID, and we know that it's not gender neutral. Women are at the forefront of the pandemic in so many ways, and the issue of gender-based violence is there with all of us. Globally, women make up about 70% of care workers who are currently on the front line. They also make up the majority of those workers now deemed essential. Those working in the food retail outlets, grocery stores, pharmacies, the postal workers, those who are cleaning our public spaces, our hospitals, waste collectors, amongst others. And even before the crisis, the dominant picture for women's paid work was that of low wages, little or no labor protection, poor working conditions, including lax or no occupational health and safety, and a lack of job security and social protections. Let's also not forget that the majority of the women workers globally are in the informal sector. Since the beginning of the various lockdowns, we've heard, seen, and felt the impact on women around the world. The frontline workers who have endured violence and harassment from customers, clients, and the general public. The poor working conditions, the increase in the amount of unpaid work that we already do, the live-in caregiver or domestic worker who's working in the home of her abuser, the women with children who are also home due to school closures, having to deal with demands from the children, having to deal with demands from their partner, from family and work. We know that the incidence of gender-based and domestic violence has also increased with COVID. There have been reports of increasing incidents of violence and harassments against staff of frontline that are in frontline services, including health and social care workers, food, retail, transport workers. We've heard from informal workers who have also faced increased violence from authorities, having their goods destroyed or confiscated. For many women, staying home does not mean staying safe. Those who have lost their jobs, those who are on layoff, and women who are working from home are all at increased risk for domestic violence. Lockdown measures resulted in women being confined with violent partners. It also has meant isolation, uncertainty, financial stress, and fear about the future. All of those things which are exacerbating tensions within households and therefore increasing the likelihood of violence. During the C-190 negotiations, we spoke about all of this and what would be needed to ensure a world free from violence and harassment. The instrument provides ways to deal with all of this. So today, we're going to hear from women who will speak on various aspects of gender-based violence. They'll break it down into 3 overall areas: how unions have been dealing with different types of violence and harassment, and how C-190 can help address even more effectively these types of violence. The rise of gender-based violence, particularly domestic violence as a result of COVID-19, and the role that trade unions are playing. The emphasis of the need for a gender-inclusive COVID-19 response and post-COVID recovery as part of a gender-equal normal. So to begin, we'll hear from 2 speakers, and then we'll go to a question and answer. So our first speaker is Irene Khumalo, and Irene is Public Services International Women's Committee Chair. She's also the first Deputy President of the Democratic Nurses Union of Swaziland. And in a recent PSI interview, Irene gave personal insight into daily life of a woman, mother, and healthcare worker during the current COVID crisis. Irene will address violence and harassment against frontline health workers and the role that public services in responding to violence and harassment. She'll highlight the increase of gender-based violence against informal economy workers during the pandemic and the importance of preventative legislation and training. And all of that can be found in Convention 190 under Article 8. She will also be followed by Julia Fox. Julia has represented workers for over 2 decades. She has always been strongly committed to addressing issues facing women at work, including equal pay and sexual harassment. She is the National Assistant Secretary of the SDA, which is the Shop, Distributive and Allied Employees Association in Australia. She's also the Vice President of UNI Asia Pacific Women. Julia will address the issue of third-party violence from customers, and which was also a lengthy discussion during the negotiations, and hopefully she'll talk about the multi-sectoral guidelines and tackle that have been set up to tackle third-party violence. So with that, I'm going to pass right directly to Irene, and Irene, once Irene is finished, we will then go directly to Julia, and then following Julia, we'll go into a question and answer period. Irene, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Irene Khumalo, Global Chairperson, representing all women, including the health care workers, under the banner of PSI. Well, I'm a nurse by profession. Nurse by profession, yes, and still a nurse even during this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm caught in between the pandemic and the right to protection. So I'm just in between where you have to still exercise the nursing practice and at the same time while making sure that my rights as a health worker, they are not infringed. As Marie has rightfully said, that 70% of the frontline healthcare workers are women. And I'm so happy that I'm part of this webinar under the theme, Stopping Gender-Based Violence, even during this pandemic. Well, gender-based violence takes different folds in the workplace. It comes in a form of emotional abuse. It comes in the form of non-conducive working environment. If the environment is not conducive, then it means I'm being violated because I have to work in a safe environment. As the Director General of WHO rightfully said, protect the health workers first. And PSI has rightfully enrolled a campaign that safe workers save lives. So we are so much frustrated here. In 120 countries, it has been reported that about 200 reports have been made that indeed healthcare workers have suffered attacks from their colleagues, from the administration, and as well as from the relatives of the patients. This is a thorn in the flesh, and as such, healthcare workers, since there is no protective clothing for them, which is actually diminished, at times healthcare workers are forced to work even without protective clothing. In the UK, 3 nurses contracted the COVID-19 and they were forced to put on garbage bags because they had to take care of the patients. That's why I said we're caught in between the nursing practice as well as our rights. Everyone has a right to work in a safe environment. Well, this has caused discord between the healthcare workers because others, they work without PPE and the others, they work with PPE. And as such, those who work without PPE, they're being harassed that they want favors from maybe the administration. And the administration as well takes it into account that if you are not working as a health worker with or without personal protective clothing, then we are victimized, intimidated. And as such, we don't take it kind to that. And we condemn that everyone has a right to work in a safe environment, free from violence and free from harassment. Let alone that healthcare workers, they suffer stress taking care of the affected and the infected. The stress is so high and such that women are at risk, that they are subjected even to sexual exploitation in the workplace, that you have to, in exchange for sanitizers or in exchange for protective clothing, then you have to engage in sex in return for the protective clothing. This is very hard, and it has been observed even in China that healthcare workers had to work long hours without breaks, and they had to put on diapers, and they were forced to take even contraceptives, that is hormonal, in order for them to delay the menstrual period, so that more time is given to the patients that they are taking care of. Let alone that we suffer the stress in the workplace. Also, women, they suffer gender-based violence even at home, because at home you go there And it's as if the family members, they can even take a hose pipe, bath you even before you come inside the house. That is the stigma attached. And we feel very much isolated, that, oh, now we are detached from the family settings. This is a stress on its own. And it has been noted that the emotional stress, as recorded in Italy and as recorded even in my own country, it has been reported that most gender-based violence is in the form of emotional abuse, let alone the emotional abuse, the economic abuse, because everyone is confined at home. The lockdown, while it is positive, that it's trying to flatten the curve, at the same time it has these negative effects, that everyone is confined at home, spending more time with the family, and those who are exposed to the abusive husbands, they spend more time being abused in the workplace. And most of the time you find that the women health workers, their husbands, maybe they've been laid off, or maybe they have salary cuts and so on. And as such, the woman at home has to continue taking care of them and bear the burden that even if there's economic abuse, or there's inconsistency in the financial status of the families, it means it's the woman again who is supposed to take the burden. That is the stress at home, then stress at home, stress at work, then there you are faced with that challenge. And fortunately, we have wellness programs. The wellness programs, they're tackling those issues to make sure that health workers, indeed, they continue to work irregardless of the COVID-19. Well, let alone the stressors, the communities, they kind of stigmatize the healthcare workers that they are carriers of the virus. And initially, before the mask was mandatory, if you are on a mask and you pass maybe someone, then they'll be saying, oh, here are those people who have the COVID, because most of the time the public has been misinformed. Fortunately, now the public is on the alert, though not most of them, because health workers, they still experience cyber attacks. Health workers, they still experience attacks from relatives because of the misinformation and inclining the COVID-19 and associating it with the health workers, that indeed it's them who have the COVID-19. And as such, it has been observed in community healthcare workers that they have to do contact tracing and they don't have personal protective equipment, because personal protective equipment is meant for doctors. Doctors, they put on spacesuits, and women, nurses, we put on just the scrubs and then the gowns and the rest of the equipment. And at times we are forced to actually attend to the patient without the protective clothing, or with only a mask. Then you're forced to attend to the patients. Well, the sexual reproductive health services are still operational. They're still available to the public. But the question now is, when the victims in the communities, because of the lockdown, they are supposed to go to the health settings, they don't reach the health settings because of the mobility restrictions. And you find that then maybe they will have they'll become pregnant, and you find that maybe they will have sexually transmitted diseases which remain untreated, and they come at a complicated state. This has given us a problem, because the referral pathways of the women, the victims, the women victims, they spend a lot of time with the perpetrators, and as such, it's even difficult for the women, not only the health workers, but all the women. It's even difficult to take a phone and you try to call a toll-free mobile number. It's very difficult, because they take advantage that if you are there, you won't access your phone, and you won't even go out, because eventually you will bring the COVID within the home setting. This is very difficult. Otherwise, the public services, they remain, they're available, and the toll-free services, they are available. And as such, they have reported a rise in the gender-based violence, mostly the emotional part, though we have some attacks, attacks of healthcare workers and attacks of other girls and women in the communities. But the rise is the emotional part. Concerning the judiciary, it is considered as a non-essential, and as such, women, the perpetrators are not sentenced in accordance to law, because there is this backlog of cases because of the COVID. It's only the agent cases that are considered. And as such, in one of the countries in Ecuador, where there is about 68% of COVID, there the women judges, because the judges are women and the secretaries are women, it's those ones who make sure that the cases are taken care of, and even the women are not left alone, so that they are not left alone, so that indeed they are taken care of, that they are not even exposed further to the perpetrators. Thus, the availability of the centers where the women and girls are kept in these times of this violence. So it's very difficult. Gender-based violence, it is an endemic, and the COVID-19 has actually found an endemic. It's an epidemic over an endemic. It's a very difficult situation. Not leaving alone the informal sector, the informal economy. Those that we have actually experienced police demolishing the structures where the women, they keep their wares, demolishing them, that, oh, this is a lockdown and everyone is supposed to stay at home. And then the question is, who is then going to take care of the family if it's the woman is the breadwinner? Or even if it's not, the woman is not a breadwinner, what will happen then at home if the man has been laid off, or if a man salary has been cut? Now this is a compromise, such that women, they suffer this stress and they have nowhere to report, because they are so frustrated, such that with this man here at home and the woman, they have to do all the care work. We have to do all the care work accordingly. Now, this is a challenge to the informal workers, and they are not left alone. They are supposed to be protected as well, and they are supposed to be in a safe environment, as alluded in the Convention 190, which includes both the informal and the formal economy. Well, while on the convention, then it means the states have to make sure that the convention is ratified. That will allow every individual to have safe, secure environment, so for that particular individual to operate. And it puts it clear that the employer and the unions, they have to work together, including the administration, they have to work together in making sure that all the policies, all the programs, they are indeed gender responsive in addressing the violence and harassment in the world of work. Well, in a nutshell, we say no to gender-based violence, and we say yes, all public services, indeed, they should be gender responsive. And also we say as women, COVID-19, it is an epidemic, but it doesn't warrant us as women to have our rights being violated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. Julia.
Thank you, Marie. And thank you for the opportunity to share with you our union's campaign on customer abuse and violence in the retail industry. It started in 2016 when our union undertook a survey of our members, wanting to hear their stories and understand their experiences of customer abuse and violence in the workplace. We received over 6,000 survey responses. The key findings of that survey showed that 88% of retail workers had been abused by customers in the previous 12 months. 25% of workers said it happened weekly, although when you speak to workplace delegates, they'll tell you it's almost a daily occurrence. 15% had experienced physical violence from a customer. 36% said abusive customers are known to them, that is, they're repeat offenders, regular shoppers. And 12% said the abuse and violence was sexual in nature. We also know that more women than men experience customer abuse and violence. These survey results also showed us that this abuse is highly underreported, and there is also a perception when you work in retail that it's part of the job because the customer is always right. So the SDA knew we needed to have a campaign and change these attitudes and change the behaviours that our members were being faced with at work. So we developed a campaign. We knew this was a long-term campaign. This is a very big issue. It's not going to change overnight. The campaign plan was a bit different from other campaigns, and we knew we had to focus on 3 key areas. The first area being we needed to actually change customer behaviour. So we needed a public-facing campaign. And we did that by developing some TV ads, a huge social media campaign, because we needed customers to understand that their behaviour needed to change. The second step we took was we needed to engage with employers in our industry. We knew this wasn't just one retailer. This is our whole industry. It is pervasive across our industry. So we needed them to understand that the level of customer abuse and violence that was going on in our industry. So we brought all our employers together, along with some government representatives and representatives from our health, Safe Work Australia, and our health regulators, and we brought them all together to have an industry roundtable. And we shared with them the survey results, and particularly shared with them the member stories. And to say they were horrified is probably an understatement, but they really hadn't turned their mind to the situations that were going on in the workplaces and the impact of customer abuse and violence on workers. We had 2 roundtables over an 18-month period. And at that first roundtable, the employers committed to industry training and also a focus on reporting, because as I said earlier, it's widely underreported. The second industry roundtable we had 18 months later, again, talking through some of the initiatives employers had already taken, particularly around reporting, training steps. And what we asked employers to do was commit to an industry statement for our industry that said you have a zero tolerance approach to customer abuse and violence, and you will also support the SDA's No One Deserves a Serve campaign. We got the employers to sign up to that, which was a good initiative. The third part of our campaign obviously had to focus on workers and changing attitudes in the workplace, that this is part of the job. We actually needed employees to report. We needed employees to tell the story to their employers about what was happening at their workplace. And we needed to build that data set and that incident reporting so we had a better picture of the issues. And then we also went to some university and got some research undertaken to help us assess what measures would have the best impact. So we did that with a couple of employers, and again, they sort of worked on steps we can take in the industry to address the issues, and that helped a lot. So things such as signage or employees wearing badges, or how we educate and how we report, etc. Further to that, in 2019, our union undertook a industry-wide survey of the prevalence of sexual harassment in our industry, and we made sure we incorporated a few questions around sexual harassment by customers. We actually found that 36% of sexual harassment is perpetrated by customers, and 14% again are repeat offenders. We know from this survey that the impact on mental health was that 44% of our members had experienced mental health consequences from that sexual harassment. 40% experienced anxiety, and 19% experienced depression as a result of the sexual harassment they experienced at work. From this survey, we also found that 40% of workplace incidences were witnessed by at least one other person. So that question around bystanders and how we educate people to speak up. Unfortunately, when you look at the number of reporting, only 13% of members report sexual harassment. And that's no surprise, because employers don't deal with it well. And in fact, the consequences of a reporting are usually you will lose your job, you're forced to resign, you will lose your shifts that you've been given, or you're transferred to another store. So we know that reporting is, again, a really important issue if we're going to change and move the dial on sexual harassment. Again, now that we have this survey results, we're ensuring that our customer abuse and violence campaign embeds sexual harassment as a key element of that. So when we're talking about the abuse, we're always talking about the sexual harassment by customers as well. Again, we're talking to employers, and we will have another round table on sexual harassment in our industry, because we need, again, an industry-wide response to how we're going to tackle the prevalence of sexual harassment in our industry. I briefly wanted to just touch on the impacts of COVID. We have seen a huge spike and increase in customer abuse and violence, and I don't think anyone would not have had that experience. In Australia, we've seen panic buying, food shortages, queues, long delays, purchase limits on items. Again, this is sort of caused a lot of frustration. There's obviously heightened fear and anxiety from people out there shopping. And so customer abuse and violence has been a really big a really big focus for the union to try and address these issues. Work health and safety is obviously, and I think Irene just spoke to some of the issues people are facing, but work health and safety has been such an important area, and the union put out a 10-point safety plan that we wanted supermarkets to adopt. A lot of the issues, a number of retailers had closed their stores, but supermarkets were still operating, and we wanted to target and ensure that we had proper safety measures in place. So we initiated a 10-point safety plan to ensure things such as physical distancing was being undertaken. We had signage up, we had floor markings to ensure we were taking the adequate steps. We wanted to promote cash-free payments. We wanted plexiglass screens in stalls in front of registers as a protection against, as a sort of shield. We wanted to make sure we had appropriate hand sanitizer in place, and there was regular cleaning of the supermarket shelves and stores. We wanted to ensure there was appropriate PPE, and it was provided at no cost to the employee, and it was regularly cleaned. We wanted to make sure we had an increased security presence because of all the issues around customer abuse and violence. We also wanted a zero tolerance approach to customer abuse and violence, and we needed the police to act on that and come in and remove violent customers. And we wanted employers, as part of our 10-point safety plan, to publicly promote our customer abuse and violence campaign. Now, all these measures were actually adopted by the retailers in the supermarkets, so that was a very good result for our members. And after this, we also put out a 10-point plan for our workers in fast food, which is slightly different issues in fast food, and also shopping centres, because shopping centres have a responsibility to put in place the appropriate safety measures for all workers. In those 10-point safety plans, our 3 pillars make sure that we talk about increased security, and we're talking about supporting a zero tolerance approach to customer abuse and violence. Further to this, the SDA redid our ads, our TV ads on customer abuse and violence with a more targeted and specific COVID message. And we released those, and the employers, I think, also played them on their socials just to try and push it out to, again, talk to customers about their behaviour. We also sought to change legislation. In one of our states, there was on-the-spot fines could be issued for spitting and coughing on essential workers, but they didn't include retail workers as an essential worker. So we fought to get that law changed, and we did. And we had a number of cases of people deliberately spitting and coughing on our members. So that was a good win, and we've managed to get that in 3 of our states or regions. We've also seen employers fast track some customer abuse and violence measures that they were probably going to put in place, this year or end of next year. And that includes training. We also have got them to actually put up signage about respectful behaviour in workplaces, which they have resisted. But this COVID crisis, I think, has shown them they really need to focus on that. So they've done that. We also have badges for our members that our employers are in a lot of places allowing our members to wear. And they go under the name tag and they say, I'm a mother, or I'm a son, or I'm a grandfather, just to personalise and make it real that these people that you're being violent towards have actually got a family and people who love them, and they should be respected and treated well. So it's been a difficult and challenging time for our retail workers and our fast food workers, but so we're just working together to try and put in all the measures that will help them. I also just wanted to lastly just touch on the work that Uni has been doing, which again, Uni Global has been very active for a long, long time in addressing gender-based violence. But in particular around COVID, we've seen Uni running a campaign on the impact of COVID on women, and it's hashtag still the front lines, because we're raising awareness about the disproportionate impact the pandemic is having on women. That's women in essential frontline jobs. That's women doing the greatest share of caring roles during this pandemic. That's the work-life balance. It's the undervaluation of women's work, which is still such a huge issue. And of course, it's the increased family and domestic violence risks that we have seen, and the outcomes for many people during this crisis. A lot of work needs to be done to address the gendered impact of COVID and to ensure recovery does not further entrench the gender roles and disadvantages that women already experience. So we need to take this opportunity and improve the lives of women. So thank you.
Thank you both, Irene and Julia. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to try and get through at least a couple of them before we get to our next segment. So to Irene, there are a couple of questions, but I want you to talk a little bit about the situation in Swaziland. There are questions about the fact that it's a little different culturally and traditionally, and how is this helping or worsening the situation of women and children within the context of COVID? And also, if you could also answer the types of violence that healthcare workers are seeing since COVID. Are they seeing different types of violence or the same types of violence that they've been seeing all along? You're still muted.
Okay, am I okay now? Okay, thank you very much. The situation here in Swaziland, for healthcare workers, I'll cite an example. In my facility, we had to remove ourselves from the work environment, stopping work altogether because there was no PPE. And as such, we had some problems with the administration, that why are we seated? We're supposed to, as I said, we're supposed to practice, that is nursing practice, we're supposed to work, and yet there is no protective clothing. So there is this, that we have to work even if the protective clothing is not adequate, because we talk about adequacy and the proper PPE. But when you have a mask on, it is described as protective clothing, then it's fine. You can go and see patients. Anyway, we have seen in the isolation, in our isolation hospital, we've seen healthcare workers contracting the COVID-19 because the protective clothing is not enough, and the environment itself it's not conducive. There is this cohorting that in one ward there are more than 4 patients that are in that particular ward, and if there are more than 4 patients, one, the aggressiveness of the COVID. My COVID is different from COVID of the next patient, and so on. Then you find the patients that they take time maybe to recover, because the other one has a mild infection and eventually will contract the other infection because they are cohorted this patient. So basically here, the situation in Swaziland, women still have that in the communities. They still have that, or they are afraid to speak out. That is still a challenge. They are afraid to speak out, and they prefer to stay with the perpetrators or the husbands. They prefer to stay with them, no matter how violent they are. And as such, the organizations that are responsible for gender-based violence, they've designed codes that these women should use when they report, because it's even difficult to report when these women, they're at home with their husbands and they're afraid to report. They're not given an opportunity, and it is said that these women, once they go out, the husband will say, no, once you go out, when you come back, you will contaminate us, that is the family and the husband, with the virus. So this has led to the women not coming out to report the gender-based violence they encounter, or the domestic violence they encounter in their homes. Well, in terms of the types of violence that the healthcare workers experience, mostly it's the emotional part. They suffer fear on its own, it's violence. Anxiety, because this one came, the pandemic came as a boom, and then there was this panic attack that everyone is afraid, or this is a very highly contagious, it's fatal, and once you get it, you die. So there was that. So the fear, the anxiety, and the depression, seeing more people affected, though we have a smaller number, it's about 285. We have 285 cases, and we've had about 3 deaths. Though it is, we say, no, it's not much, but we are adding numbers on a daily basis. We're still going up. We haven't flattened the curve as yet, though we have other cases that are recovering, a high number of cases, about 168 that are recovering, and 3 deaths currently. So most of the time, even the women at home, they are afraid. It's the fear that always the woman shall be subordinate to the men, and then the fear, whatever the man does to the woman won't report.
Thanks, Irene. Julia, you talked, sorry, I just ended up with Japanese or Korean in my ear. Sorry. Are there any examples of how unions have used the provisions of C-190 and Recommendation 206 in negotiating with employers during COVID? I don't know if anybody else is also having this issue. I'm getting Japanese on the English or Korean on the English channel.
No.
Julia, did you hear my question?
Yes, I did. Yep, I was just waiting to see if you had your Japanese fixed. I think it has changed. I think they are taking sexual harassment and abuse and violence more seriously, and I do think C-190 has made an impact on that, and it has sharpened employers' minds to their obligations and the need to fix this and address this. But in terms of formal things being put in place in Australia, that hasn't happened yet. But it is just helpful at this point in time to have that and know that that's coming. For the government needs to consider it, and we will be pushing for them to ratify that in Australia, etc. But we actually haven't got formal measures in place in Australia yet.
Thank you. I'm just to let the interpreters know, Korean is coming on the English channel and English is coming on the Korean channel. We could try and fix that. Thank you, Julia. I recognize that we are, running short of time, and I want to hear the other panelists. I want to also let people know, if you look over on your webinar chat, there have been lots of links that have been shared with respect to issues around domestic violence and third-party violence that you can utilize in your own organization. You can look at what other folks are doing. I know that in a number of countries, I know there's a notice on the chat about Spain, but in a number of countries that they have instituted hotlines for folks to call. They've instituted signs for when you're on a Zoom chat or video call that you can put up so that people know that you need assistance. All different kinds of things that we've been doing since COVID that we can use during COVID and beyond. And so I think that it's really important for those who are looking for information to assist, that this, just click on the links that are on the side. So let me thank both Irene and Julia. Thank you so much for your presentations, and I know that there will be other questions, and if we have time at the end, we can come to some more of your questions. So moving along, our next speaker will be Fish. Fish is the regional coordinator of the International Domestic Workers Federation for the Asia Pacific region. She has been an organizer for domestic workers since 1999, and in 2001, she founded the Hong Kong Domestic Workers General Union, the first local union of Chinese domestic workers. And in 2010, she founded the first union federation of local and migrant domestic workers with different nationalities, the Hong Kong Federation of Asian Domestic Workers. We all know that the situation of domestic workers is unique, as many are away from their home country and their families. They're stuck in countries where they may be excluded from any of the COVID responses, which means that they're now deprived of any income and therefore at a higher risk for getting the virus. Many are also still working and doing so without any protective equipment. Fish will focus on the impact of migrant domestic workers, many of whom have lost their income and have no means to survive or options to return home. Fish?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me in here to this important webinar. So first of all, I really want to reiterate what is said in C190, how it defines violence and harassment in the world of work, in the way that it is a range of unacceptable behaviors and practices or threats, whether a single occasion or repeated, that aim at or resulted or likely to result in physical, psychological, sexual, economic harm, including gender-based violence and harassment. I want to say, like just what Irene said and Julia said, many women workers, including domestic workers, who are taking care of the society, of the employers, of the patients, and their employers' families are doing especially important work during this COVID-19. However, even before COVID-19, we have violence, but with COVID-19, we are very upset and especially angry in the way that the state is allowing more institutional violence and harassment against these women workers when we are in the front line fighting against COVID-19. Why I'm saying that is that, first of all, of course, many women workers are already getting lower paid. And with COVID-19, suddenly their job is cut off. They are facing more economically violence. And for domestic workers and care workers, they are working in private households. And with the lockdown, with everything, they are confined in the households and they cannot go back. For migrant workers, they cannot go back to their own countries. And even if they are facing violence, even their employers is very, very abusive. So, but then the government is kind of having COVID-19, all these violence and harassment are kind of ignored and even justified. So I think we deserve really an answer why it is like that. And it seems with COVID-19, everything, including freedom, rights, and rights to be free of violence is suddenly can be totally ignored. Domestic workers are in the informal sector. Most of them are already excluded from the labor law. And sometimes there are domestic violence law that may include domestic workers in the domestic violence law. But when we have abuse and exploitation, the implementation is largely a problem. So if you talk to the police are just turn you away. And of course, on top of that, there are also corruption problem. And with this COVID-19, the migrants, what I mean is the rural migrants and the cross-border migrants are facing extremely serious violence and exploitation. So first of all, actually, the domestic workers are with the employers. The employers are traveling, and we have experienced already domestic workers got infected of COVID-19 by their employers. But in fact, the public is pointing their fingers to the domestic workers in the way that, oh, you guys, domestic workers, if you go out for your rest day, you will got infected with the COVID-19. So there is a whole chunk of discrimination against the domestic workers just because they are domestic workers, just because they are women, just because they are from a poorer countries. So you have more chance to get infected of COVID-19 if you want to enjoy your rest day going out. So this is no sense when the employers at the same time ask the migrant domestic workers to run for to go to supermarkets to buy food. Yeah. So this kind of discrimination is very and more serious against domestic workers. And also there are countries like Malaysia. They are making use of this period of time to increase their rate against the migrant workers in Malaysia. So these have put the domestic workers and migrants who are already invisible more to push them more into the dark when they are in the dark, but they are being put into more dark. So, but the government is doing that, and this is an increased situation of violence against these migrants and domestic workers in this period of time. And these are all justified with the name of COVID-19. And we have seen domestic workers, because of the lockdown, as I said, when they face no food or very abusive situation, they are confined, they cannot easily go away or change to another employment. Because if you change to another, if you want to escape from your current employer as a migrant domestic workers, how are you going to find a new employer when there's a lockdown, when there's no flights back? How can you get a new visa when your embassy and consulate is not handling that? There's no flights back, meaning you cannot leave your employment, meaning you have to be kept silent on any abuses, exploitation, or because of COVID-19. And until now, the government is still justifying that, turning blind eye on that, and the public is still pointing their fingers to the migrant domestic workers of having more chance of infection of COVID-19, which is totally unjustifiable. And for those migrants, we have irregular migrant domestic workers in many countries. When they are being raided and arrested by the immigration officer, they are put into the immigration detention center. And very often, these immigration detention centers are very bad environment and situations. So there may not be protective equipment, there's no mask, and you never know when you will be able to return back. So for prison, you have a prison term. If you have 1 year, you stay 1 year prison term. If you have 2 years, you stay 2 years. But in immigration center, detention center, no one knows when you can leave the immigration detention center. So this creates a lot of psychological and mental problem for those migrants who are detained by the government and immigration. So in response, the affiliates of the IWF, the domestic workers unions and organizations has been responding very fast in the times of COVID-19, because what the lesson I can observe is that is because many domestic workers organizations, they have very grounded organizing in their community. So many, we have leaders in the committee and respond to the needs of the domestic workers with the food and money. And also one very important issue is that domestic workers have always, and most of them are excluded from the Social Security. Even the government is giving some package to, or relief package to general workers, but the domestic workers are excluded. So our affiliates have been fighting for Social Security, including domestic workers and informal workers in the Social Security and relief package. And we would also like to call for stopping all these raids against the migrants in the name of COVID-19, because you are increasing violence and putting them from the dark into more dark. We want the governments to review all the laws and policy, making use of the C-190. So C-190 shouldn't be just one law, but it should be included in every laws and policies, including the immigration policies. And government should impose anti-discrimination law, because we can see with COVID-19, employer, government, the public is discriminating more against these women and domestic workers. And of course, last but not least, is the inclusion of informal and domestic workers in the Social Security. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Fish. We know that domestic workers are on the front lines, even though a lot of them are not included. In a lot of countries, they're not included as frontline workers, but they are definitely on the front line. A number of countries have been pushing for status for all domestic workers, migrant workers, because they know that if they don't have that status when they come in, it's very difficult. In a number of countries too, you're finding that domestic workers and other migrant workers are paying into the system, but they're not eligible for the COVID-19 benefits that people have been getting. And a number, again, we've been hearing from a number of people, a number of countries and migrant organizations are now banding together. So it's not just the migrant worker organizations in Canada or the migrant worker organizations in the US or the migrant organizations alone in Singapore or wherever. Everybody's banding together to say the same thing. There needs to be status. All the programs that are available for COVID should also be available to migrant domestic workers and all migrant workers. Again, in many countries, they pay into the social protections and they don't get the benefits of those social protections. So we need to make sure that we continue to push for inclusion in all of the laws of the land. After all, they're workers just like everybody else, and they're entitled to protections just like everyone else. There are no questions. Fish, it was great. There are no questions from the audience, but there are lots and lots and lots of comments, a lot of them basically confirming all the things that you've said. One of the questions that have come up, do you have any data about the number and the names of countries where domestic workers are facing severe harassment due to COVID? That is one question. The second one is, have you heard about sending countries or receiving countries requiring migrant domestic workers when they're coming back in, or migrant workers when they're coming back into the country, to sign waivers to say that country's not responsible for COVID? We've heard those stories as well, coming from domestic workers and our migrant agricultural workers. So again, do you have any data that you can share with us, Fish?
Currently, we haven't yet very comprehensive data. We have some of our affiliates are doing some survey, but it's still not yet compiled. But we have a lot of stories about the facing of more severe discrimination. Like if you come across the social media platform, there are many of the public in Singapore, Malaysia. I will talk about the raid by the government against the migrant workers and domestic workers. And in Singapore, because there is an outbreak of COVID-19 in the dormitory of migrants, so the public is very is stigmatizing the migrants who are carrying or more prone to COVID-19 infection, which is not true. This is just really like discrimination. And in Hong Kong, actually, we had an earlier epidemic in Hong Kong of COVID-19. So already in end of January, the government is already making a formal statement calling for the migrant domestic workers to stay at home on their Sundays, but they are not calling for the employers rearranging the work schedule of the domestic workers so that they can not going outside for so often, but they just call the migrant domestic workers to stay at home on rest day. And this is certainly ridiculous. And it is the government who is doing it. So with these different stories, we really see there's a discrimination. So the affiliates in Hong Kong FATWO is also trying to encourage the members to file complaints at the Equal Opportunities Commission, because there is a disability discrimination ordinance in Hong Kong. If you have imputed discrimination, For example, if you assume the domestic workers have COVID-19 after you come out to outside on rest day and the domestic workers is dismissed, this is violating the law. So of course, this is very special in Hong Kong, which has this anti-discrimination ordinance. So this is something that we can study further to stop all these discrimination. But of course, I want to stress again, having one discrimination standalone ordinance is not enough. All the immigration, labor policies, and the domestic violence laws, etc., has to have to apply the definition in C189 and the measures written in the C189. C189 and C190.
190. Yeah. It's important. Both of them have to go together. 189 and 190. Really important that both of them be signed and that we have campaigns that make sure that both of them are heard together. Thank you so much, Fish, for the information that you have shared with us. And again, I know that people will want more as time goes on, and they'll know how to get some additional information through contacting you and reading some of the comments and tools that have been left in the chat. Again, thank you. Our next speaker is Sheila. Sheila is the Vice President of MSTKS India. She is currently leading the groundbreaking national study on domestic violence and its impacts at the workplace in India. The ITF, she's also a member of the International Transport Federation, and they're currently doing a qualitative study with male perpetrators of domestic violence, as well as a national study with unions around the understanding of the impacts of domestic violence at work from the perspective of the survivor. Sheila, I will pass the baton to you, and I'm sure that everyone will be listening intently, and there'll be lots of questions at the very end of this. We know that the issue of domestic violence was significant during the negotiations, and so I'm eager to hear, as are others, what's currently happening. Sheila.
Thank you, sister. कौटुंबिक हिंसाचार का हमारा अनुभव बहुत ही अलग, अच्छा और चैलेंजिंग रहा। भारत में एक काम बहुत अच्छी तरह से हुआ है। पहली बार किसी सर्वे पर 16,000 महिलाओं ने ऑनलाइन डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के बारे में जानकारी दी है। इन महिलाओं तक हम पहुंचे हैं। मेरी यूनियन ने पहली बार इस तरह का काम किया है कि डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस का कामकाज पर क्या असर होता है। और मेरी जो ट्रेन वुमेन एडवोकेट्स थी, जिनको हम निर्भया कहते हैं, वो निर्भया ने इस काम में जी जान जोड़कर काम किया है। उन्होंने अपनी छुट्टियां ली, अपने पैसे खर्च करके हमने निर्भया परिक्रमा का अभियान किया। निर्भया परिक्रमा माने हमने पूर्ण महाराष्ट्र में हर डिवीजन में हम जाके महिलाओं के साथ मिले, उनके साथ मीटिंग कंडक्ट किया और उनके साथ बातचीत की। टेक्निकल प्रॉब्लम की वजह से कई महिलाओं के पास स्मार्टफोन नहीं थे, कई महिलाओं का ऑनलाइन फॉर्म कैसे भरते पता नहीं था, क्योंकि हम लोगों ने सिर्फ रोड ट्रांसपोर्ट वुमेन के साथ ही बात नहीं की। समाज की कई ऐसी महिलाएं जो कि हेल्थ वर्कर है, नर्सेस है, टीचर है, बैंक कर्मचारी है, मजदूरी करने वाली है, खेती में काम करने वाली है, झाड़ू पोछा करने वाली है, इन सब महिलाओं के साथ हम इंटरेक्ट हुए, उनके साथ बात की और हमको एक बहुत अच्छा अनुभव आया कि हम उनके साथ बात कर पाए। उनको भी बहुत अच्छा लगा कि हम उनके तक पहुँचे, उनका दुख, उनकी वेदना हम समझ सके। ये बहुत अच्छा अनुभव रहा। 8,000 महिलाओं को हम पूरे सर्वे में मिल चुके थे। और मेरी जो निर्भया है, उन्होंने बहुत अच्छी तरह से काम किया। जब हम ये काम कर रहे थे तो कम्युनिटी के बहुत अलायंसेस के साथ भी हमारा बहुत अच्छा रिलेशन था। वैसे तो पहले से ही हम इनके साथ काम कर रहे थे, लेकिन डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के सर्वे में कई संस्थाओं ने हमको मदद की, जिनके साथ हमारे बहुत फ्रेंडली रिलेशन थे, जैसे कि पुलिस है, मीडिया है, वकील, लीगल एडवाइजर है, NGO है, स्टूडेंट्स है, इन सब ने हमको काफ़ी मेहनत की। मेरी निर्भया एडवोकेट ने इस काम से उनका कॉन्फिडेंस भी बढ़ गया और एक स्टिग्मा जो था कि डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस का, वो तोड़ने में या उसको थोड़ा सा ब्रेक लगाने में मेरी निर्भया कामयाब हुई है। कोविड के लॉकडाउन के पीरियड में डोमेस्टिक फाइनेंस का और कम्युनिटी अलायंसेस का हमको बहुत अच्छा अनुभव आया। मेरी एक महिला जो रोड ट्रांसपोर्ट में काम करती है, उसको अनचाहा गर्भ रह गया लॉकडाउन के पीरियड में। वो उसको गिराना चाहती थी, अबॉर्शन करना चाहती थी, लेकिन बाहर तो पूरा बंद था और उसका पति उसको इतना परेशान कर रहा था, वो उसको ही गाली गलौज कर रहा है। ऐसे टाइम पे उसने हमको फ़ोन किया। फिर हमने हमारे कम्युनिटी अलायंसेस में सम्यक नाम उनकी संस्था है, उनको हमने किया। वो संस्था ने इस महिला को अच्छा मार्गदर्शन किया और उसका अबॉर्शन सेफली हो गया। सेकेंड इंसिडेंट था कि डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस में घर में बहुत ज़्यादा अत्याचार बढ़ रहे थे, तो टाटा इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ सोशल वर्कर के कुछ एक्सपर्ट्स ने हाँ मुझे कुछ कहना है, ये ऑनलाइन फोरम चालू किया था। तो वो फोरम के साथ भी हमने टाई अप किया। उसमें कई महिलाओं ने इन एक्सपर्ट महिलाओं के साथ बात करके घरगुती हिंसाचार से कैसा ओवरकम करने का, मानसिकता कैसी बढ़ाने की, काउंसलिंग का सब फायदा ले लिया। तो मैं कहना चाहती हूँ कि कम्युनिटी अलायंसेस के साथ रिलेशन बिल्डअप होने से हमको एक बहुत अच्छा फायदा हो गया कि लॉकडाउन के पीरियड में भी हमारी महिलाएं डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस का जो ज़्यादा परिणाम होने वाला था वो कम हो गया। हम और अच्छा काम कर सकते थे। 2 महीने हमने काम किया, लेकिन लॉकडाउन की वजह से हमको ये काम मार्च में रोकना पड़ा। लेकिन हम बहुत खुश हैं कि हमने बहुत अच्छे तरीके से ये अभियान में काम किया है।
Okay, thank you, Sheila. There are a number of questions and comments with respect to the issue of domestic violence. And I wonder if we could, just passing on, sorry. All the questions are coming in quickly, and there are a bunch of them that are coming in all at the same time. So I know that the issue of domestic violence is one that is front and center. At the beginning of the pandemic and prior to the pandemic, a number of people talked about the importance of getting information out there, because people that are in situations where they're locked down, they can't go anywhere, don't have that support, don't have the supports that they need. And so in a number of countries, I know that they started doing public service announcements on the television, on the radio, on social media to assist people that were experiencing domestic violence, especially with respect to the increase. There is also the Trade Union Congress in the UK also have an online tool, and we were hoping to have somebody come on to talk to us about their online tool, but they weren't available. But I would encourage folks to please visit the TUC website, take a look at what they have done with respect to violence and harassment. You can also visit the International Federation of Journalists website. They have an online campaign that is dealing with online trolling of women journalists. The Canadian Labour Congress has a full domestic violence campaign, complete with facilitator training. Australia, Germany, there are a number of affiliates and labor centers that have, and I would encourage those who have not taken the time or haven't had the time to take a look at all of those incidences or those tools and resources to take the time to look at them. I have a question, and it's to all the panelists, and you can speak on if there's something too that you wanted to raise that you weren't able to raise at that time. Feel free to raise it during this time. So to what extent are different forms of sexual violence, whether it's rape, sexual abuse of children, and harassment, coming up for women and girls, whether in the home, in the public, online, or at work during the lockdown? I've responded a little bit as to what we're getting. I mean, when we first went into lockdown, shelters were full. We have only so many spaces, and shelters were full based on lack of funding for many decades. There were no spaces, no beds for women who were going through violence and harassment, which forced the government to open up more and to put more money into all of those programs. So let me ask the panelists, anybody else talk about what some things that are happening in your neck of the woods, in your industry, in your sector, to deal with domestic violence during the lockdown. I can't see now I can see everyone. Anybody want to make a comment on that? There's so much that we could be talking about. There's so much to address with respect to gender-based violence during COVID. We know that in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Belgium, Taiwan, Mongolia, I've already mentioned Canada, they've shown that roughly half of all survivors who experience domestic violence also experience abuse at work. And about 40% of survivors report that domestic violence affects their ability to get to work, and an overwhelming majority say that the abusive behavior has a negative impact on their work performance. So we're in the time of COVID and people are home. We've been saying that work is a safe space for people and that employers have a responsibility to provide that safety for everyone. It's not about ending domestic violence, it's about protection and protecting anyone who may come in contact with somebody who is going through or who is an abuser, who is perpetrating violence on others. So it's extremely important to ensure that that there is protections. It's also important to utilize the instruments. Right? Convention 190 and Recommendation 206 have a number of articles and language in there that can assist. And I know that one of the questions that was asked before was with respect to collective bargaining and talking to employers about protections during COVID. Has there been anything in terms of negotiating, in terms of bargaining, for those who are still at work, whether they're working from home or back in the office, policies that have been put in place during COVID that could assist beyond COVID?
Well, can I say
Irene?
something? Yes, can I say something? In terms of collective bargaining has been suspended somehow. That is the terms and condition of service. But otherwise, us as healthcare workers, because we're involved in the disaster management team, we are taking advantage of that. And we have since seen that the lab technicians, for instance, those who are taking tests here in Swaziland, have downed tools that know they want compensation. One, there are no enough test kits and they don't have compensation. They are not compensated. And again, the teams that are doing contact tracing, they are not even compensated as well. And us as healthcare workers, we have said that indeed we want health insurance, because there are provisions in the national laws here in Swaziland that we have to have allowances, the infectious disease allowance. So while it has suspended the conditions of service, but we have indicated that we want to go to the bargaining table and negotiate the insurance issues and the risk allowance issues, seeing that most of the health workers now are downing tools. The lab technicians, they are downing tools. Those who are contact tracing, they are downing tools. So everyone eventually will down tools. And if we go to table and allow the bargaining activities to go on, that eventually we get compensated during this era, even if it can be during this era alone, when the era goes off, or when the pandemic finishes, maybe we will then again sit down and say, no, we should just maintain that we should have a health insurance, or we should have a risk allowance, so that we make sure that we deal with the disasters accordingly, knowing very well that we are compensated, though our lives are at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. So apparently there is another clip from Sheila that I don't know if it's queued up, that we can hear. Thank you.
घरगुती हिंसाचार और काम की जगह, इसका बहुत अच्छा रिलेशन है। हमने जब ये सर्वे किया, कई महिलाओं के साथ हम मिले, तो कई सारे महिलाओं ने कहा कि हम ड्यूटी कर रहे हैं, हम कुछ कमा रहे हैं, इसलिए अच्छा है कि हम इस परिस्थिति को बहुत अच्छी तरीके से हम फेस कर रहे हैं। अगर हमको नौकरी नहीं होती, हम अगर काम की जगह पे नहीं होते, हम इकोनॉमिकली इंडिपेंडेंट नहीं होते, तो पता नहीं आज हम कहाँ होते। जब एक काम की जगह महिलाओं के लिए एक कंफर्टेबल प्लेस है, कंफर्टेबल जोन वो महसूस करती है। किसी महिलाओं के साथ जब कौटुंबिक हिंसाचार होता है, तो घर में उसके साथ गाली गलौज होता है, अपमानित किया जाता है, कभी मारपीट हो जाती है, बच्चों के सामने इंसल्ट किया जाता है, और उसकी वजह से उसकी मानसिकता वो बहुत नाराज रहती है, डिप्रेशन में रहती है, हर तो समय वो तनाव में रहती है, और वो चाहती, उसका दम घुटता है, और वो चाहती है कि इस जोन से बाहर निकलो। और जब वो काम की जगह पे जाती है, तो अपनी कई सहेलियों के साथ अपनी बातें शेयर करती है। वहाँ पे वुमेन एडवोकेसी की हमारी ट्रेन महिलाएं होती है, उनके साथ वो बात करती है, उस पर क्या सोल्यूशन निकलना चाहिए, चर्चा होती है। किसी डॉक्टर के साथ, किसी पुलिस के साथ, लीगल एडवाइजर के साथ वो बात करती है, काउंसलिंग कर सकती है। ये सब बातें वो वर्क प्लेस पे कर सकती है। घर में वो ये कर नहीं पाती, क्योंकि उसके साथ मारपीट करने वाला पति उसके सामने होता है, इसलिए वो ये कुछ नहीं कर पाती है। तो कई महिलाओं ने हमको ये कहा कि काम की जगह उनके लिए एक बहुत अच्छा फीलिंग देने वाला स्थल है, वो वहाँ पे बहुत सुरक्षित महसूस करती है, और वो चाहती है कि कई लोगों ने तो ये कहा कि हमारे यहाँ पे दम घुटता है, और जब हम काम की जगह पर जाते हैं तो हमको शांति मिलती है, सुरक्षा मिलती है, और इस परिस्थिति से लड़ने की ताकत हमें काम की जगह पर मिलती है। ये पॉइंट बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। और मैं कहना चाहती हूँ कि ILO का जो कन्वेंशन है, पहली बार डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस पे हो रहा है, और इसमें डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के इस सर्वे ने और ये महिलाओं का ये जो बातचीत है, उनकी जो अनुभव है, इसे वो कन्वेंशन होना चाहिए, क्योंकि वर्क प्लेस इशू है, और ये डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस कामकाज का हिस्सा है। ये यूनियन को मानना चाहिए, शासन को मानना चाहिए, और प्रशासन को भी मानना चाहिए।
Thank you. So we know that the various things that we have to deal with during this pandemic are things that women have been dealing with for a very, very long time. We also know that during the pandemic, political will and whatever else was working in the background was able in some places to make sure that women were getting paid leave, women were getting protective equipment, and we were getting the various social protections that we didn't have before, including guaranteed incomes. So we know that that's the ability for governments to do that is there. They need the political will to ensure that this actually happens. And if you're looking at a gender responsive post-COVID response, then all of those things that we have talked about today must be included in that. And women must be at the table when we're having those discussions about what a post-COVID world will look like. As we keep talking about in all of these sessions, we can't go back to normal. Normal is not cutting it anymore. We know what governments are able to do now on short notice, and we're going to continue to push for that. We're going to continue to fight to keep all the things that we got as workers, that assisted us as workers during COVID, to keep that going forward. We need to ensure that we continue to push for ratification of C-190. We continue to do training around domestic violence. We continue to be there and understand that our frontline workers are essential to everything that we do. And the majority of us are women. We've been saying it loud, loud, loud for decades. And now the asking is over. We're demanding that these things happen, and these things happen now. And if we work together from country to country to country, I think that we can force some change that will be positive and that will work for women. I'm going to ask the panelists if any of you have any last comments that you want to make to your audience. We have about 3 minutes left. And so the floor is yours. Just, I can see everybody, so just put up your hand if you want to make a final comment. I will actually go to Julia first and see if she wanted to say anything else. Then we'll go to Fish and then back to Irene.
Thank you, Marie. I just wanted to emphasize your point about women at the table. It is absolutely vital that decisions that are going to be made at all levels of government have women at the table, at every table. And that's whether it's about policy decisions, social welfare decisions, and commitments that governments are making. They also need to make sure that a gender analysis is taking place on the policies before those policies are put out, not after they've been put out, to make sure that there is a positive impact on women and the disadvantages women are facing now and continue to face. So I can't emphasize how important that one is, Marie, and completely agree with you there.
Thank you, Julia. Fish, do you have any last words or comments that you want to make?
Yes. So first of all, what we are talking about is power imbalance. Why we, women workers, informal domestic workers, are facing violence and harassment is exactly because of we have less power. So bear with that in mind. We have to continue organize. In the times of difficulties, you always see the most beautiful thing when people are organized, help each other, and at the same time, very evil, like for example, the politician at this kind of time. So we have to keep our community, our union, our members to be together to protect ourselves, to build up our power. And the other issue I really want to raise is on discrimination. This is something not easy to talk with. It's very deep in everybody's mind, in religious, cultural, gender, etc., etc. So I would like to call for all the unions and leaders and organizers here to look into this issue of discrimination and keep on doing a lot of workshops and trainings and help our members and workers to reflect on our own, on the existing discrimination, and build up and empower and fight against discrimination so that we can fight against the violence and harassment and the abuse of power in the times of COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fish. There's no doubt that anti-racism, anti-oppression, discrimination has to be part of whatever work we do going forward. Irene?
Thank you very much. I would like to say, even if it's a disaster that is currently disorganizing us or disrupting all the activities in most of the countries, it is important that we guard against gender-based violence, and it is important that we guard against the sexual reproductive health rights. And again, we as unions, we should fight for fair compensation as the frontline workers, and we should also fight for safe working conditions in line with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And fortunately, the C-190 has been ratified by 2 countries, so hopefully it will be enforced, and employers will be able to adopt programs and policies that are in line with the convention. And we also say unions should continue to fight for PPE, because currently here in Swaziland we don't have PPE. We rely mostly on donations.
Thank you.
The situation at hand. Yes.
Thank you, Irene.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Sheila? We have 1 minute.
Yes. Yes. Hello. Can you hear me? No.
Okay.
Sheila ji, we can hear you.
Sheila doesn't realize that we can hear her and we are running out of time. So I want to thank everyone. I want to encourage everyone. I think that the chat on the side can be available. If you saved the chat, take a look at all of the things that the various unions globally are doing to deal with gender-based violence and the issues of domestic violence and other forms of violence in the workplace and in the community. Take a look at the work that we're doing and share it. Share it with community organizations because they don't know the work that we do. And everybody, I want to thank all of you for watching, and please, please, please continue to push for the ratification of Convention 190 and Convention 189. I want to thank all of you. Please go to the ITUC website, the ILO website, and other websites that you are seeing linked on the right-hand side to get more and further information on gender and COVID and the impacts of COVID on women. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you to the interpreters, and we'll see you all again the next one. Thanks, everyone.